Welcome back to the Fox Den, everyone, a podcast series from West Shore Community College. We are reviewing the Winter 2025 book of the semester, Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This episode covers part 3, where we are joined in the Fox Den by co-host and library director Patti Skinner, academic writing consultant Lorynn Hackert, executive director of college relations Crystal Young, and professor of English and education Henne. I'm your co-host and professor of mathematics, Wade James. And now, part 3 of Klara and the Sun.
I'm Patti Skinner, and in the bubble game, my bubble reads, When's lunch?
I'm Lorynn Hackert, and much like Klara, I do think that the sun can heal, especially during Michigan's long winters.
I'm Henne, and today I'll be actually talking about not just Klara, but also two other people, Dickon and Pilgrim, who nobody knows but me.
My name's Crystal Young, and when I was reading about the button couch, I couldn't help but think of my grandparents' bright orange couch that had buttons on it that I fondly thought of as the orange button couch.
I'm Wade James, and I would like to have a long conversation with Miss Helen.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited to get right into talking about Klara and the Sun Part 3. And in this section, Klara's really grappling with some deeper human emotions. So she's trying to understand how these humans are feeling, and it's kind of at odds with her previous learning about humans. She had more of a surface level of understanding. So she's delving deeper into human feeling. And I feel like this goes right along with our humankind theme of overcoming loneliness and exploring these topics of what it means to be human. One of the major things that occurred during this section was playing the bubble game. So what are some of our initial thoughts on the bubble game?
We as people, let alone younger people, struggle to put our thoughts or emotions into words. So for them to develop this way of communication where someone draws a picture and then someone fills in the pieces as to what they're saying, I found it very fascinating as it continued into the point of where they were developing a conflict. For some reason, I found myself getting really uncomfortable, and I haven't quite pinpointed why yet.
It might be, Crystal, because Klara is uncomfortable. She has just recently learned about subtext, the fact that such a thing exists, and now she's being asked to try to decipher them, and it's awkward. She has her back to them, and she's not even looking in their direction when she's sitting on the button couch. So all she hears is the conversation they're having. She has to guess at what the images are. She has to guess at what Rick's even writing on there. We're frustrated because we can't figure out the subtext, but a lot of our frustration is Klara's frustration. Hoping that there are Matt Sanderson disciples out there listening to this, because the Plato's cave thing, looking the wrong way or facing the wrong way from being able to understand or achieve recognition of the way things actually are. There's some of that going on with poor Klara there.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, many times she's observing them through the reflection in the window and not observing them directly. Also, when she does pick up the sheets of paper with the illustrations, she refers to the characters as Picture Josie and Picture Rick, which are separate than Josie and Rick.
Yeah, like alternate egos.
And you're right that she's piecing that together after the fact. So we're trying to reconfigure these facts and go through Klara's line of vision too. So we're right there with her.
I feel like so much of this book is about understanding how people communicate, or in this case, misunderstanding communication. I feel like that is so on par with these relationships that you have when you are at Rick and Josie's age. Not only can like stuff verbally get misconstrued, but even in the bubble game, it does too. I feel like it was just a sign of where they are at in their lives and how they interact with each other.
So one of the quotes that I found interesting from the bubble game was that Rick wrote, "The smart kids think that I have no shape, but I do. I'm just keeping it hidden because who wants them to see?" The picture was kind of from a water blob person, and Josie thought that Rick was writing about himself, that he was the one keeping himself hidden. But then when Klara looked at it, she thought that it was about Josie. So which one of them do you think is correct?
I think you could definitely apply it to both of them. I interpreted the smart kids being the lifted kids, and having no shape to me came off as being unlifted. So Rick, his shape, which in my mind is like his intelligence, his skills, personality, things that make Rick, give him shape as a person. aren't really considered by others, considering his unlifted status. But I also feel like it could be Josie too. Her sickness, she's isolated. And I do think that there is this kind of developing independence that she has inside of her. But because she's so sick and isolated, that is hidden. So I can see it being both of them.
The third possibility is that when she wrote that, she was actually thinking about Klara, because she doesn't actually end up confirming anyone's suspicions about what she actually meant. And Klara could be the blob creature that's not quite part of the society that the other children have in that space.
So Loryn's implying that being lifted means the smarter kids, which she was associating with those kids that have been lifted. So what do you all think it means to be lifted?
My guess was genetic alteration. So those who are privileged either in economics or connections have the ability to alter their children to, quote unquote, be lifted or moved in a certain direction from what their original birth or genetic pool was.
So one problem for a geneticist who were trying to do any liftedness was trying to figure out what they meant by intelligence. You have an idea of what you mean by intelligence and which genetic markers might prefigure intelligence, but whether or not that's expansive to include all the ways we think about people being intelligent, emotional intelligence or interpersonal intelligence, it's not discussed there. So you don't know that they're lifted maybe to do better logical processing, but does that mean that they're lifted in other areas that we would recognize people to be intelligent?
It sounds like they're almost emotionally stunted.
So it's possible to represent them as stick figures in a cartoon.
So there's one more quote that I want to discuss from the bubble game. And it was, I wish I could go out and walk and run and skateboard and swim in lakes, but I can't because my mother has courage. So instead, I get to stay in bed and be sick. But I'm glad about this. I really am. So this was the quote that created the tension between Josie and Rick. I think this starts to show some differences between Josie's mother and Rick's mother and the choices that they've made.
When thinking about the mothers and their efforts to make their children's lives better, we kind of like raise our eyebrows at some of the things that they do. But when thinking about courage on Chrissy's end of things, she obviously goes ahead and rolls the dice again with lifting. And then with Helen, I kind of think that she has a little bit of courage too by not lifting Rick. I don't know. I think about both the moms. I think about the common goal that they share. And even though their efforts might be misunderstood, I don't think we can blame them or let go of the idea that they both have the courage to kind of do what they got to do.
My take was, I think Helen had more courage. I'm more critical of Chrissy, and I feel like she is motivated selfishly. I'm sympathizing more with Helen right now.
But then you get the ending of the section, right? She comes back into motherhood there at the end.
Yeah.
The place I went is this weird place I alluded to in the introduction. There's a novel called The Secret Garden. It's a pretty popular English children's book by Francis Burnett from the early part of the 20th century. And it also features an invalid child. His name's Colin, and he's being shut away because his people that are in charge of his life think that faces too much of a trauma to be physically a part of the world outside. Sun doesn't help him. There's a garden thing that helps him. But the thing that eventually helps him is actually a disagreement or an intensity with the little girl Mary, who comes and stays in the same house that he lives in. And the challenge of working with her as a human being is what actually brings him out of himself. The question that Patty's asking is about the role of the parent in this situation. In this case, the children in the secret garden escape from out from under what the parents had designated for them, which is sort of what Josie and Rick's plan is, to live their own life, and despite whether it's a good intention or not on the part of their mothers, to get out from under that and live their own experience. So I was just flashing secret garden stuff.
So another important scene in this section is when Klara takes the drawing that says Rick and Josie forever to Rick's house. What did we make of her visiting there and kind of taking in our first introduction to where Rick lives?
I think it shows that Klara is going to do whatever she can to make Josie happy. So she's like, you know what? I got to bring this to him, mend whatever wounds are here. And when we get to Rick's house, we are kind of introduced to the idea that, okay, this looks a lot different than Josie's house. So I think where they live and how that looks and how it's different than Josie's life does kind of go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of how being lifted is kind of this class indicator of where you are.
The thing I was most fascinated by on Klara's approach to that house, understanding the markers that we're talking about that distinguishes it as a social class issue. One of the things that she sees and notices and then reminds herself that she noticed it later is a broken refrigerator. So in the previous section, she'd been relegated to standing next to the refrigerator as if she's an appliance like the refrigerator in many interactions. So the symbol or the mark of that refrigerator no longer used, no longer being valued, lying by itself in a heap of other junk. And the fact that she notices it twice prefigures other ways of thinking about what we do with AFs.
I also thought it was so interesting how Helen more than once said, well, I would know how to interact with you if you were a vacuum. Again, associating Klara with an appliance, and like that would have been easier to just think of her as an appliance. Like, can I borrow your vacuum? Would be an easy sentence you would know just how to phrase
But
that.
not in a mean way, in kind
Oh,
of
you like Helen.
yeah, Helen's awesome.
But you didn't read what Helen was saying there as a potential putting Klara in her place, a belittling of the AF role.
Not really. I see the housekeeper doing more of that as being more derogatory towards Klara as an appliance. And Helen appeared to be interested in Klara and also trying to figure out how she can leverage Klara to get Rick into the school by tutoring and things like that.
Right.
So
you can demonstrate that you're not a vacuum cleaner if you help my kiddo out.
So Helen's interest in Klara is as a tutor for Rick. In kind of talking about some of these class distinctions, Rick has not had some of the same opportunities. She found him a set of textbooks, but he needs a qualified tutor. So do you think that this is something that Klara is qualified for? Do you think the other oblong tutors are also AFs? Is this part of her programming?
I feel like Klara is not qualified to do it because to me, her main role is to learn and observe. So in a way, she feels more like a student than a teacher.
if Klara was to be a teacher, she would be the nicest teacher because she also wants to be your friend. And sometimes that's not always a good thing.
So wrapping up our time at Rick and Helen's house, Klara was confused by Helen's insistence that Rick should go away to college because she knows that that will result in Helen feeling lonely. And she was under the impression that humans would avoid loneliness at all costs. So this is kind of coming at odds with her limited understanding of the depth of human emotion. Why, as humans, would we choose loneliness?
I don't think humans choose loneliness. I think sometimes the choices we make, loneliness is a result of that. So it's the ripple effect. And so if I'm doing what I think is best in the situation, and the result of that is I'm lonely or I'm cut off for some reason, if I'm still focused on my goal of doing the best thing for my children, that's what I'm choosing. I am not choosing loneliness.
This is my favorite part of this section of the book. Klara's confrontation with the fact that loneliness is not necessarily a bad thing, and that some people choose loneliness as the lesser of two evils, or they choose loneliness at the betterment of those people that they love. Through this whole thing, Klara's endeavors were to avoid loneliness for Josie at all costs. And she encounters Helen, which completely 180s that.
It's not clear whether Klara's programming allows her to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Obviously, there are human beings that choose to be alone and value the power of aloneness, and we don't refer to that as loneliness, we call it solitude. And Klara might just be dimly coming into an awareness of the value of that. Not that that makes us feel any better when she's spending so much time in isolation herself.
Could you do that for us right now? Differentiate between loneliness and solitude?
Imagining to yourself being on one of those windswept islands off the coast of the west of Ireland and being a hermit monk from the 17th century in Ireland and choosing to live out there or wanting to live out there. Why would you value that opportunity to become spiritually connected with yourself? But that's a reality. People did that, and people still do that, things like that. Why did Thoreau go into the woods, right? That notion that we can discover something spiritually powerful or significant being by ourselves, that a character would choose to do something like that, whether through an altruistic reason like what Helen's doing, or because of some value that they find in being able to commune with something greater than themselves or with themselves, doesn't yet occur to Klara, although she's becoming aware of that in this section.
Klara sets out on this journey to Mr. McBain's barn, and she encounters some trouble with her vision. It's kind of reminiscent of her trip to Morgan Falls. What significance do you think this beginning has?
I was rereading this section last night, and where she starts getting really like fearful and disoriented, she describes that as being in unkind boxes, and that all she needs to do is just get to a kind box and she will be okay. And so I feel like this does demonstrate her kind of growing awareness of like good and bad in the world, but she can't really articulate that outside of just describing it as a good or a bad box. I feel like it shows that she's still observing, but it is developing, but she's not quite seeing the world yet. Everything is just still in boxes for her.
So where I went this time is another English novel. This one is called Pilgrim's Progress. So it was written in the 17th century, and it was by John Bunyan, and he was a new convert to Puritanism, in fact, and was trying to figure out how to describe that theology in a symbolic way. And so he describes this character Pilgrim who goes through a number of unfortunate adventures, misreads the landscape, misreads his Bible, doesn't understand where he is. One of the places he goes is the Slough of Despond, which feels a lot like when Klara is in the tall grass and doesn't understand where to go. It's supposed to be that he's going to get to salvation. And when he gets to salvation, he'll have achieved clarity on all of these theological questions that he doesn't understand all the way there, right? But reading Klara trying to stumble through the rudimentary beginnings of her understanding of theology, like what does the sun represent? How can the sun provide some kind of salvation or some redeeming value to the life that seems meaningless? Like that kind of thing felt a lot to me like Pilgrim on that adventure to discovering Protestant theology for the first time. She's so black and white about the way that she sees her developing faith system that it felt a lot like reading Pilgrim's Progress to me.
Sean, I agree. I took this entire scene as like a religious experience and like, wow, do artificial intelligence, do they have religion or theology? Because she is literally making this pilgrimage to a place where she thinks a higher power or being or divinity resides, and then is pleading, making a deal, aka praying. I took this portion of part 3 as that.
What would Rick's role be in this religious parallel that we're drawing?
A mentor or like a priest, or just someone who's there to help you along the path. Like you think back to what Sean was saying, where she's confused and stumbling. So when you stumble, who's there to help pick you up? Whether that is a friend or a mentor or someone who kind of knows the way but doesn't know everything and can help you on your journey.
Continuing with this reference to the theology, Klara continues to try to bargain with the sun. This is something I think that's almost like a human experience. It's something we've all done where you're like, okay, please just do this thing, this one thing, and I'll do whatever. Klara is trying to end pollution and destroy the Cootings machine in trade for the sun sharing its healing power.
The thing that troubles me the most about that is that she's quite capable of leading humans into her delusions. When she comes to an erroneous conclusion about something, she involves other people, or actually human beings, in the erroneous conclusion that she comes to. It's easy for Rick to agree to do anything that she comes to a conclusion about because he's got Josie's well-being in mind. But the reality is that he's being led astray by artificial intelligence there.
It's like a hallucination.
What do you think about Klara not divulging her plan to either Rick or the housekeeper? She says, I have to go to the barn, and Rick questions why, and Klara can't tell him because she wants to keep it a secret. And when she talks about going into the town, again, the housekeeper says why, and Klara kind of hides that. It's almost like Klara is expecting the humans to have faith in her plan to make Josie better.
It, I think, plays along with the authors challenging us on how to think about faith. And again, that theology thread in this scene. But that's interesting way that you pointed that out. Like, she has faith that the son is going to do something, and she expects that faith to be carried forward from Rick and the housekeeper.
Hopefully it makes us sketched out that AI is keeping stuff from us, right? So if the AI figures out what might be valuable for us, it's then not showing us everything. It's just determine what we should see and what we shouldn't see. I mean, Klara is not revealing all of the things that she knows or she thinks. What's being hidden from us when we get an answer from AI? The hair raising on the back of your neck thing happens a lot.
It's not a very direct hair raising on the back of your neck. Oh, the sweet AF that is trying to help this girl is kind of got some secrets.
Yeah, manipulative. Well, she learned that from Josie, right? So when Josie's doing the bubble game thing with Rick, she clearly has a stratagem in mind, or she's doing some of that kind of stuff, and she's not revealing everything that she's thinking. Klara gets to learn from the master.
This section ends with Josie having a nightmare, and her mom comes to comfort her, and she says, "I don't want to die, Mom. I don't want that." This is Josie battling with her own mortality and understanding her sickness.
I think it just kind of shows like how serious things are starting to get with Josie and her being sick. Leading up to this point, seems like Josie never really made her sickness her own focal point in life. That was kind of something other people were doing when thinking of Josie and how she moves throughout her life. But now Josie's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to die. Like what you said, her own mortality is something she's really starting to think about now. And, you know, Chrissy really has to start thinking about seriously what she's going to do if that happens, and makes Klara's efforts to get the son to help her that much more serious.
I wonder what the trigger was, because up to this point, Josie has, like Lorynn said, sort of deflected and ignored her sickness. She has plans with Rick, and they're going to be together forever. And she wants to go, like in the last section, she wanted to go to Morgan Falls because she felt she was healthy enough to do it. And what was it that actually made her come to grips with her own mortality?
I agree with you, Wade. I think there's some piece of information that we have not yet been introduced to.
The thing that occurred to me was the challenge for Klara, because she tries to be the AF in that role. She thinks, okay, this is a moment for me to shine. I can support Josie in this crisis moment, and that wasn't going to happen. And so at the end of the section, she says something about pondering the implications of this. I don't think the implications are only about what's potentially going to happen to Josie. It's also about what does it mean that Klara can't be the friend that she thought she was designed to be.
And that she potentially can't save her. She can't harness the power of the sun to fulfill her full duty as she would see it in helping to heal Josie.
You've been listening to The Fox Den, a podcast series from West Shore Community College. This has been our discussion of the Winter 2025 book of the semester, Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro.
Thank you so much for joining us. That's our podcast. I'm Patti Skinner.
I am Crystal Young.
I'm Sean Henne.
I'm Lorynn Hackert.
And I'm Wade James.
Thanks, man.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.